She signed the lease for $1 and didn't question why. 3 months behind on rent, eviction notice burning a hole in her messenger bag, and a landlord who never showed his face. Maya Chen should have known better. But when you're choosing between a roof and your next meal, you stop asking questions you don't want answered. The manor loomed at the end of Oleander Street like a forgotten memory. All gray stone and ivy-choked windows. Paint peeled from the shutters in long strips, revealing wood gone silver with age. The iron gate shrieked when she pushed it open, a sound like nails on a chalkboard that sent crows scattering from the dead oak in the yard. Maya's art portfolio banged against her hip as she climbed the front steps, each board groaning under her weight. The ad had been simple, almost too simple. Room for rent, $1 per month, utilities included, artist preferred. She'd laughed when she first saw it, certain it was a scam, but the email response had been professional, the lease agreement legitimate, and the virtual tour had shown a space with north-facing windows and enough room for an easel. At this point, she couldn't afford to be picky. The key was exactly where the email said it would be, tucked under a terracotta pot that held nothing but dead soil and the ghost of some long-gone plant. Her hand trembled as she fitted it into the lock. The door swung open without a sound, revealing a foyer that smelled of old books and something else she couldn't name. Not decay, exactly. More like absence, like the smell of a room where no one had breathed for a very long time. Hello? Maya's voice echoed through the empty hall. The lease said the owner lived on site, that she'd have the entire second floor to herself. But the silence that greeted her was so complete, it felt alive, pressing against her eardrums like water. She climbed the stairs, her footsteps muffled by a carpet runner worn thin in the center. The second-floor hallway stretched before her, 3 doors on each side, all closed except the one at the far end. Light spilled through the gap, golden and inviting, so different from the gray gloom everywhere else. The room was perfect, 20 feet by 15, with windows that faced north, just like the photos had promised. Hardwood floors that needed refinishing, but were structurally sound. A small bathroom attached, white subway tile and a clawfoot tub. And best of all, completely empty. No furniture, no clutter, just space. Maya set down her portfolio and turned in a slow circle, already imagining where everything would go. Easel by the windows for the light. Desk against the south wall. Mattress in the corner until she could afford a bed frame. She could make this work. She had to make this work. The gallery had rejected her latest series. Her day job at the coffee shop barely covered food. Her ex had kept the apartment, the car, everything except her art supplies and the clothes on her back. This $1 room was the difference between giving up and giving herself one more chance. She spent the afternoon hauling her belongings up the stairs. It didn't take long. 3 boxes of art supplies, 2 suitcases of clothes, a rolled-up mattress she'd bought from a sidewalk sale. By the time the sun started to set, she'd created something that almost resembled a home. The manor settled around her as darkness fell, wood contracting with soft creaks and groans. Maya sat cross-legged on her mattress, eating cold pizza from a box, watching shadows crawl across the walls. She should have felt afraid, alone in this huge empty house, with a landlord she'd never met. But exhaustion was a powerful sedative. She was asleep before she finished her second slice, still wearing her paint-stained jeans, her sketchbook open across her lap. The cold woke her. It started at her fingertips, a chill that spread up her arms like frost climbing a window. Maya's eyes snapped open. The room was dark, darker than it should have been. The streetlight outside her window cast no glow. The moon had disappeared behind clouds, and standing at the foot of her mattress was a shadow in the shape of a man. Her scream caught in her throat, strangled by fear. The shadow didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there, perfectly still, watching her with eyes she couldn't see but could feel like weights on her skin. "Please," Maya whispered. "Please don't hurt me." The shadow tilted its head. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through empty rooms, soft and hollow and achingly sad. "I couldn't hurt you if I tried. Not yet. Not until midnight." And then, as if someone had thrown a switch, the shadow became solid. A man stood before her, tall and lean, dressed in clothes from another era. High-collared shirt, black waistcoat, trousers that buttoned at the knee. His hair fell past his shoulders, dark as ink, framing a face so pale it seemed to glow in the darkness. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Silver, like mercury, like moonlight on water. Beautiful and terrible and completely, utterly wrong. "My name is Morpheus Nightfall," he said, and his voice was different now. Less hollow, more real. "I'm your landlord, and I'm afraid I wasn't entirely truthful in my advertisement." Maya's back hit the wall. She'd scrambled backward without realizing it, her sketchbook falling to the floor with a slap of paper on wood. You're not real. Ghosts aren't real." He smiled, and it was the saddest expression she'd ever seen. "I wish you were right." He took a step forward, and she noticed his feet made no sound on the hardwood, no creak of boards, no scuff of shoes, just silence. "I've been dead for 147 years, he continued, as casually as someone might mention the weather. "Most of that time, I've existed in a state between states, unable to touch, to feel, to interact with the physical world in any meaningful way." His eyes met hers, and she saw centuries of loneliness in them. But at midnight, for exactly 1 hour, the barrier thins. I become real enough to touch, real enough to feel, real enough to remember what it was like to be alive. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane. She was hallucinating. Bad pizza, stress, a nervous breakdown, finally catching up with her. But he looked so real, standing there in the moonlight that had suddenly returned, painting silver streaks across his impossibly pale skin. "Why?" she managed. "Why did you rent me a room? Why $1? Why me?" Morpheus moved to the window, passing through a beam of moonlight that seemed to make him even more translucent. "Because I'm tired of being alone," he said quietly. "Because artists see things other people don't. Because your application essay said you paint things that don't exist, and I thought perhaps you might be able to see something that no longer exists. Because for $1 a month, I'm not buying a tenant. I'm buying the possibility of conversation, of company, of 1 hour a day where I can pretend I'm still human." The confession hung in the air between them like smoke. Maya's fear should have been growing. She should have been running, calling the police, anything but sitting there on her second-hand mattress, staring at a ghost who spoke about loneliness like it was a physical wound. But she'd spent the last 3 months sleeping in her car, working double shifts, watching her dreams slip through her fingers like water. She recognized desperation when she saw it, even in a dead man's eyes. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Until midnight ends." Morpheus turned from the window, surprise flickering across his face. "You're not running. I'm too tired to run." Maya pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "And if I'm hallucinating, I might as well commit. If you're real, well, I've dealt with worse roommates." The ghost's laugh was unexpected, warm and genuine, and for a moment he looked almost alive. The silver in his eyes brightened, like stars coming out after rain. "I promise I'm an excellent landlord. I don't make noise, I never eat your food, and the rent is very reasonable. What's the catch?" "There's always a catch." His smile faded. At 1 in the morning, I returned to shadow. Intangible. Unable to affect the physical world in any way. I can watch, I can listen, but I cannot touch, cannot hold, cannot feel warmth or cold or the texture of anything real. He moved closer, each step deliberate, and Maya noticed he cast no shadow of his own. The catch is that I'm selfish. I'm lonely. And I'm asking you to share your space with something that shouldn't exist. Simply because I can't bear another century of silence. That's not a catch, Maya said quietly. That's just honesty. They stared at each other across the space of her room, stranger and ghost, both displaced from the lives they'd planned. Outside, a clock somewhere in the manor began to chime, deep bell tones that resonated through the floorboards. Morpheus closed his eyes. That's the half hour. 30 minutes until I fade. If you want me to leave, I will. The lease is real. The room is yours. You'll never see me again unless you choose to. Maya thought about the eviction notice, the rejection letters, the ex-boyfriend who'd said she was wasting her life chasing impossible dreams. She thought about the gallery owner who'd told her that her work was technically perfect but emotionally empty, that she painted beautiful things but never let anyone see her soul. And she thought about the way Morpheus looked at her, like she was the first real thing he'd seen in 147 years. I paint at night anyway, she said. The light's better, less harsh. If you promise not to critique my work, you can stay. Something happened to his face then. The careful mask cracked, revealing wonder underneath. You mean that? Why wouldn't I? You're paying me $1 to live in a mansion. Least I can do is provide conversation. She stood up, ignoring the way her legs trembled, and walked to where her portfolio leaned against the wall. She pulled out a canvas, one of her rejected pieces. A woman made of autumn leaves, dissolving into wind. Technically perfect, the gallery owner had said. But where's the emotion? Where's the pain? Morpheus moved beside her, close enough that she could feel cold radiating from him, like winter air. His eyes traced the brushstrokes, the careful blending of colors, the way she'd captured light filtering through translucent maple leaves. It's beautiful, he said. But you don't believe that. Maya's fingers tightened on the canvas edge. I paint what I see. Beautiful things. Pretty things. Things that don't hurt. The gallery wants pain. They want my trauma on display. They want me to bleed on canvas and call it art. And you can't do that. She set the painting down, harder than necessary. I don't know how. Morpheus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, May I touch it? The painting? She nodded, watching as he reached out with fingers that seemed too pale to be real. He traced the edge of a leaf, the curve of the woman's dissolving shoulder. His touch left no mark, no fingerprint, nothing to show he'd been there. You painted this leaf, he said softly, pointing to one at the edge of the composition. It's dying. You can see the brown creeping in at the edges, the way it's curling inward. That's pain. That's decay. But you surrounded it with healthy leaves, as if trying to hide it. Maya stared at the canvas. She'd never noticed that leaf before, never consciously painted it that way. I don't. Maya stopped. The clock began to chime again. Midnight. Morpheus's form solidified further. The translucence faded, replaced by skin that looked almost real, almost warm. His eyes brightened from mercury to silver to something close to human gray. And when he reached for her hand, she felt it. Actually felt it. His fingers were cold, but solid. Real. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, and she saw wonder on his face. Like he'd forgotten what touch felt like. You're warm, he whispered. He said it the way someone might say you're miraculous. Like her living warmth was the most impossible thing in the world. Maya's heart hammered. But she didn't pull away. For the first time in months, someone was looking at her like she mattered. Not her art, not her potential, just her. 1 hour, she said. 1 hour a day, you're real. He nodded. 1 hour a day, I remember what it feels like to be alive. They stood there, ghost and artist, hands touching in the middle of an empty room. Outside, the city slept. Inside, two lonely souls discovered they could hold each other, if only until the clock struck 1. What do you want to do? Maya asked. With your hour? Morpheus smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. Talk. I want to talk to someone who sees me. Someone who doesn't run. Someone who knows what it's like to be invisible. She understood then. The $1 rent. The artist preferred. He hadn't been looking for a tenant. He'd been looking for someone desperate enough to stay, creative enough to believe, lonely enough to understand. Someone like her. She squeezed his cold hand. Okay. Let's talk. They talked until the clock struck 1. Morpheus told her about dying young, about a carriage accident on a rain-slicked street, about waking up to discover he'd become something caught between worlds. Maya told him about art school, about the professors who'd loved her technical skill but questioned her passion, about the slow realization that she'd been painting to please others for so long, she'd forgotten how to please herself. When the hour ended, he faded like morning mist, his hand slipping through hers like water. 1 moment solid, the next transparent, then gone entirely. But his voice remained, that hollow wind through rooms sound. I'm still here. I can hear you. You just can't hear me. Maya spoke to the empty air anyway. Good night, Morpheus. She thought she felt something brush her cheek, cold and gentle as a ghost's kiss. Then she was alone. The next morning, she woke to sunlight streaming through her north-facing windows and wondered if she'd dreamed the entire encounter. But there on her floor, next to the autumn leaves painting, was a single drawing. Done in charcoal on paper she didn't recognize, old and yellowed at the edges. It showed her sleeping, sketchbook on her lap, exactly as she'd been when he first appeared. The detail was extraordinary. Every fold of her clothes, every strand of hair, the exact angle of her head. In the corner, in handwriting that looked antique, were the words, "You're real, even when you sleep." Maya pressed her fingers to her mouth. Not a dream then. A ghost, a lonely ghost who drew her while she slept and left evidence like a calling card. She should have been terrified. Instead, she found herself smiling. The day passed in a blur of unpacking and setting up her makeshift studio. She arranged her easel by the window, organized her paints by color temperature, tacked sketches to the walls. The house remained silent around her, but she found herself talking anyway, narrating her actions like she was hosting a one-person radio show. I think the cadmium red goes here. What do you think? No opinion? You're a terrible assistant, Silence answered, but she could have sworn the air shifted. Amused. By afternoon, she'd created something resembling a working space. She stood in the center, hands on hips, surveying her domain. It wasn't much, but it was hers. More than that, it was possibility. Room to create. Time to figure out what she actually wanted to paint. No gallery owners breathing down her neck, no ex-boyfriend commenting on her lack of commercial appeal. Just her supplies, and apparently a ghost with good taste in tenants. She painted as the sun set, working on a new piece without planning it first. Usually she sketched everything out, precise and controlled. But tonight her brush moved on instinct, laying down colors that spoke to something deeper than technique. Blues and grays and silvers, the suggestion of a figure. The feeling of cold. She worked until her back ached, until the light faded completely, until the clock in the hallway began its midnight chime. Maya set down her brush and turned. Morpheus stood in the doorway, watching her with those impossible silver eyes. His form solidified with each bell tone, shadow becoming substance, until he looked almost human save for the pallor of his skin and the way moonlight seemed to collect around him like fog. "You painted," he said softly. She nodded, suddenly nervous. "What do you think?" He moved into the room, each step silent, until he stood before the canvas. The figure she'd painted was abstract, more suggestion than reality, but there was something in the curve of the shoulders, the tilt of the head, something lonely, something lost. "You painted me," Morpheus said. It wasn't a question. Maya hadn't realized it until he said it, but yes, she'd painted him, or at least the feeling of him. The weight of 147 years of isolation, the cold that wasn't quite physical, the way he seemed to exist in negative space, defined by absence rather than presence. "I didn't mean to," she started. But he turned to her with such raw emotion on his face that the words died. "Thank you," he whispered. "In 147 years, no one has seen me clearly enough to capture what this feels like." His hand lifted, reaching toward the canvas but not quite touching. She'd used silver leaf in places, something she never did because it was expensive and difficult to work with. But it caught the moonlight now, making parts of the figure glow with the same quality as Morpheus's eyes. Maya's throat tightened. "I just painted what I felt. That's the problem. I always paint what I feel. I just never felt anything worth painting before. That's not true." He turned to face her fully. "You felt everything. You've just been afraid to admit it." The words hit harder than they should have. Maya looked away, uncomfortable with being seen so clearly. She'd spent years building walls, painting pretty things, staying safe in technical perfection. It was easier than vulnerability, easier than admitting that every rejection hurt, that her ex-boyfriend's dismissal had shattered something inside her, that she was terrified she'd wasted a decade chasing a dream that would never love her back. "Show me," Morpheus said gently. "Show me the paintings you're afraid of." There was no judgment in his voice, no demand, just curiosity, and something that looked like understanding. Maya hesitated. Then she walked to her portfolio and pulled out the canvases she never showed anyone. The experimental pieces. The ones that didn't make sense. The ones that felt too raw, too honest, too much. She'd painted them late at night, in fits of insomnia and desperation, and then hidden them away because they didn't match what galleries wanted. She spread them across the floor. 5 paintings. 5 confessions. A girl with birds flying out of her chest, her ribcage open and empty. A woman drowning in flowers, beautiful blooms filling her lungs. A figure made of broken mirrors, each piece reflecting a different face. A heart growing roots, planted in concrete. A pair of hands releasing fireflies, watching them disappear into darkness. Morpheus knelt beside them, careful not to let his coat touch the paint. He studied each one with the intensity of someone reading sacred texts. Minutes passed. The only sound was the distant ticking of the hallway clock, counting down their hour. "These are extraordinary," he finally said. His voice was rough, like he'd been crying, though ghosts couldn't cry. "These are what you should be painting." The gallery rejected them. Every gallery rejects them. They're too weird, too personal, too much. His eyes met hers, and there was something fierce in them. They're too true. That's what frightens people. You're not painting what you see anymore. You're painting what you are. And that's terrifying, because it means you can be rejected. Not your technique. Not your skill. You. Maya sank to the floor beside him, suddenly exhausted. That's why I stopped. That's why I went back to pretty things. Safe things. Morpheus reached for her hand, that cold, solid touch that she was beginning to crave. Being seen is always a risk. I should know. I've been invisible for 147 years. But you see me. You saw me the moment you walked into this house. I felt you noticing the architecture, the way light moved through the windows. You see everything. Maybe that's why I had to rent to you. Maybe the universe knew I needed someone who actually looks. She laughed, a broken sound. The universe paired me with a ghost because I see too much? Stranger things have happened. He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look young, despite the centuries in his eyes. Besides, you needed a place where no one would judge you, where you could be as strange as you needed to be, where being different was the requirement, not the disqualification. Maya looked around her makeshift studio, at the rejected paintings spread across the floor like confessions, at the ghost kneeling beside her who understood loneliness better than anyone living. Maybe he was right. Maybe this house, this impossible situation, was exactly what she needed. Tell me about your art, she said. The drawing you left me. You're incredible. Do you still create? I try. Morpheus's expression clouded. But there's a problem with being a ghost. I can only interact with the physical world during my hour. The rest of the time, I can observe but not touch. Cannot hold a pencil. Cannot feel paper. Cannot create anything except in this one stolen hour each night. Then create with me. The offer surprised them both. Maya hadn't planned to say it, but once the words were out, they felt right. You have an hour. I have all night. We could collaborate. His eyes widened, that mercury silver brightening with something that looked like hope. You would do that? Why not? I'm blocked anyway. Maybe working with someone else will help me figure out what I'm trying to say. And you get to create. We both win. Morpheus was quiet for a long moment, his cold hand still wrapped around hers. Then he nodded, slowly, like someone accepting a precious gift they weren't sure they deserved. I would like that very much. They spent the rest of the hour planning. Morpheus would sketch during his midnight hour, working on ideas and compositions. Maya would paint during the day, interpreting his sketches, adding her own vision. They'd build something together, ghost and artist, combining their perspectives into something neither could create alone. When the clock struck 1 and he began to fade, Maya felt the loss of his touch like a physical thing, but his voice remained, that hollow whisper. Thank you. For seeing me. For staying. For not running when any sane person would have. She spoke to the empty air. Thank you for the $1 rent, for understanding desperation, for being lonely enough to take a chance on a broke artist with nowhere else to go. She felt that cold brush against her cheek again, gentle as breath. Then silence. The next days fell into a rhythm. Maya painted during sunlight hours, working on commissions that paid the bills. Small pieces, commercial work, the kind of art that sold but didn't matter. She needed money for food, for supplies, for the internet connection that let her take on freelance projects. But when evening came, she'd switch to the canvases that meant something. The strange ones. The honest ones. The collaborations with her ghost. Morpheus's sketches appeared each morning, left beside her easel like gifts. They were extraordinary, full of movement and emotion that took her breath away. He drew things from memory, streets that no longer existed, fashions from a century past, moments frozen in time. But he also drew her, Maya, working, Maya sleeping. Maya sitting by the window watching rain. She'd never seen herself through someone else's eyes before. In his drawings, she looked different, stronger, more real. She began painting his sketches, adding color to his memories. A street scene became a study in golden hour light. A portrait of a woman in Victorian dress became an exploration of texture and shadow. His technical skill combined with her color sense, creating something neither could achieve alone. At midnight, they'd talk, sometimes about art, sometimes about their pasts, sometimes about nothing important at all. She learned that he'd been a painter too, in life. That he'd died on the way to his first exhibition, his paintings lost in the carriage accident that killed him. That he'd spent 147 years watching art evolve without him, unable to participate, only observe. He learned that she'd given up everything for art, that her family had disowned her for choosing beauty school over beauty, that every relationship she'd ever had ended because she loved painting more than people, that she was beginning to think she was fundamentally unlovable because she couldn't be normal, couldn't want normal things, couldn't stop seeing the world in color and composition. "You're not unlovable," Morpheus said one night, his cold hand cupping her face. "You're just an artist. We love differently. We love too much and not enough, and always in ways that confuse people who don't create." Maya leaned into his touch, craving the cold that reminded her he was real. "Have you ever been in love?" "Once. A long time ago." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "She didn't understand my painting either. Said I cared more about canvas than her. Maybe she was right. Or maybe she just wasn't the right person." Maya's heart hammered. She was aware of how close they were, of his face inches from hers, of the way the moonlight painted silver streaks across his too pale skin, aware that she was falling for a ghost, which was impossible and ridiculous and completely insane. What happened to her? Your love? She married someone sensible, had children, lived a long, happy life. Morpheus smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "I watched from the shadows, made sure she was safe. Let her go because I was dead and she deserved someone alive. Do you regret it, letting her go? Every day." His eyes met hers, and there was such longing in them it hurt to see. "But what choice did I have? I couldn't touch her except for 1 hour. Couldn't give her a life. Couldn't be anything but a cold shadow she'd eventually resent. Better to be alone than to trap someone in half a life." Maya understood. She'd made similar calculations, hadn't she? Chosen art over relationships, chosen possibility over certainty, chosen loneliness over compromise. Maybe that's why she understood Morpheus so completely. They were both people who'd chosen passion over practicality and paid the price in isolation. "I'm falling for you," she said quietly. It wasn't a question, wasn't even really a confession, just a statement of fact. Said the way someone might mention the weather. "The clock is ticking. We have 17 minutes left. I thought you should know." Morpheus's hands stilled on her face. "I'm dead, Maya. Not really. You're here. You're real. You touch me every night. That's more real than most of my relationships with living people. But I can only give you an hour." She smiled, and it was braver than she felt. "Then make the hour count." He kissed her then, or tried to. His lips were cold against hers, ice on fire, and the sensation was so strange and perfect and terrifying that she gasped. He pulled back immediately, eyes wide with concern. "Too much? Not enough." She pulled him back, threading her fingers through his hair that felt like silk and shadows. They kissed like drowning people coming up for air, desperate and careful and achingly tender. His hands framed her face, her waist, trembling with the effort of being gentle when he wanted to hold her like she might disappear. Time became elastic. 17 minutes stretched into forever. They broke apart only when the clock began its 1 a.m. chime, both breathing hard even though he didn't technically need to breathe. Morpheus rested his forehead against hers, and she watched his form begin to fade, solid becoming translucent, becoming shadow. "Don't go," she whispered, knowing it was useless. "I have to." His voice was already changing, becoming hollow. "But I'll be here, always here." He faded completely, leaving her alone in the moonlight, with lips still tingling from cold and a heart beating too fast for comfort. Maya touched her mouth, feeling the ghost of his kiss, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. The next week passed in a haze of paint and longing. They created art together, building a series of collaborative pieces that were unlike anything Maya had ever made. Morpheus's classical training combined with her modern sensibilities, his memories merged with her imagination, creating works that existed outside of time. A woman dancing in a ballroom that dissolved into stars. A man made of midnight, reaching toward dawn. Two figures separated by a wall of glass, hands pressed together from opposite sides. The paintings were beautiful and heartbreaking, and so honest it hurt to look at them. But they were also falling deeper into something that couldn't possibly work. Maya found herself counting down the hours until midnight, living for that 1 hour when she could touch him, talk to him, pretend they were normal. She painted during the day, but thought about him constantly, wondered what he was doing, watching her with eyes she couldn't see, wondered if he was lonely in the daylight, trapped in shadow while she lived and breathed and existed in ways he never could again. At night, they explored the boundaries of what they could have, kissing until the hour ran out, lying tangled together on her mattress, his cold seeping into her warmth, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about dying, about the moment of impact, about waking up to realize he was no longer alive, but not quite gone either. She told him about the night she'd slept in her car, about the morning she'd woken up and couldn't remember why she was fighting so hard, about the moment she'd seen his advertisement and thought maybe, just maybe, the universe was giving her one more chance. But the clock was always counting down, always reminding them that their time was borrowed, stolen, limited. 60 minutes a day. Never enough. "We have to break this," Maya said one night, 3 weeks after she'd moved in. "The curse. Whatever's keeping you like this, there has to be a way." Morpheus was tracing patterns on her palm, his touch sending shivers up her arm. "I've tried everything. Every ritual, every spell, every old wives' tale about breaking curses. Nothing works. Because you tried alone." Maya sat up, suddenly energized. "You said it yourself. You've been doing this for 147 years by yourself. Maybe you need someone else. Maybe you need me." His eyes were wary. Hope was dangerous for someone who'd been disappointed for over a century. "Maya, even if there was a way, what would it change? I'd still be dead. I'd still be trapped in this house. At least this way, I get 1 hour with you. What if you could have more? What if we could break you free completely?" She stood, pacing her small room, mind racing. "There has to be something. A reason you're still here. Unfinished business, or true love, or something. This isn't a fairy tale." His voice was gentle, but firm. "Dead is dead. The midnight hour is already more than I should have, but it's not enough." She turned to face him, and there were tears on her cheeks. "It's not enough for me. I want mornings with you. Afternoons. I want to paint with you in daylight. I want people to see you. I want you to exist outside this house, outside this hour. I want everything." Morpheus rose, moving to her with that silent grace that still startled her. He wiped her tears with cold thumbs, and his expression was breaking. "I want that too, more than you know. But wanting doesn't make it possible. Then we find a way to make it possible." Maya grabbed his hands, holding tight. You said yourself, you're here for a reason. There's always a reason in ghost stories. Unfinished business. A curse to break. A lesson to learn. What if it's about connection? About being seen? About creating? What if the answer has been here all along, and you just needed the right person to help you figure it out? The clock struck midnight. 30 minutes left. Morpheus looked at her like she was the sun, and he'd been living in darkness for over a century. Which, Maya supposed, he had. Tell me what to do, he said. I'll try anything if it means more time with you. They started researching the next day. Maya spent hours at the library, pulling books on folklore and ghost stories and supernatural phenomena. She talked to paranormal investigators online, joined forums dedicated to hauntings, read everything she could find about spirits trapped between worlds. The common thread in every story was the same. Ghosts remained because of unfinished business. Something left undone in life that kept them tethered to the mortal world. For some, it was revenge. For others, a message undelivered. For many, it was love, interrupted by death before it could reach its natural conclusion. But Morpheus had been a painter who died on the way to his first exhibition. His unfinished business seemed obvious. He never got to show his work. Never got recognition. Never got to contribute his art to the world before death stole that chance. What if that's it? Maya said that night, excited. What if you need to have your exhibition? Need people to see your work? He was skeptical. I've created hundreds of pieces in 147 years. I've left them all over this house. No one has ever seen them except you. Because you're hiding them. She grabbed his cold hand. What if we showed them? What if we put together a real exhibition? Your work and mine, our collaborations, everything. What if we made you visible to the world? It won't work. How do you know if you've never tried? The question hung between them. Morpheus stared at their joined hands, at the way her living warmth met his death cold, two impossibilities touching. Finally, he nodded. The house is full of my paintings. 147 years worth. They're in the third-floor studio. I haven't been up there in decades. Can't bear to see them during the day, and at midnight, I'd rather be with you. Show me. Maya stood, pulling him toward the door. They had 20 minutes left of his hour, but it was enough. The third floor was accessed through a narrow staircase hidden behind a door she'd thought was a closet. Dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight as they climbed, each step creaking beneath their feet. Well, beneath hers. Morpheus made no sound. The studio was enormous, taking up the entire third floor. Skylights let in moonlight, painting everything silver and shadow, and covering every wall, stacked against every surface, were paintings. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Maya's breath caught. She moved from canvas to canvas, her flashlight illuminating scenes from another century. Street scenes so detailed she could count the cobblestones. Portraits so lifelike the eyes seemed to follow her. Landscapes that captured light with a master's hand. Abstract pieces that wouldn't look out of place in a modern gallery. Morpheus had spent 147 years creating a museum's worth of art that no one had ever seen. These are incredible, she whispered. These are museum quality. This is your life's work, your death's work. This is everything. He stood in the center of the room, looking around at the accumulated evidence of over a century of isolation. I painted to remember what it felt like to be alive, to have purpose, to create something that mattered. I never thought anyone would see them. We're going to show them. Maya's voice was fierce. We're going to put together the exhibition you never got to have. We're going to make people see you. And maybe, just maybe, that will be enough to break whatever's keeping you here. But I can't attend my own exhibition. I can only exist from midnight to 1 a.m. Then we'll have a midnight showing. She turned to him, eyes bright. an invitation-only event. Artists and critics and gallery owners. At midnight, here in your house. We'll call it a haunted house exhibition. Make it a whole experience. They'll come. Artists love weird. Collectors love exclusive. And your work is good enough to make them forget how strange it is to view art at midnight. The clock struck 1. Morpheus began to fade, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. Do you really think it could work? I think we have to try. His hand slipped through hers, solid becoming mist. I'm terrified. Good. Maya smiled into the darkness where he'd been standing. That means it matters. The next 2 weeks were chaos. Maya worked like someone possessed, cataloging Morpheus's paintings, photographing each piece, creating a digital portfolio. She reached out to her old art school connections, the ones who'd made it in the gallery world while she'd struggled. She pitched the midnight exhibition as an immersive art experience, a one-night-only event combining Victorian Gothic atmosphere with contemporary relevance. She didn't mention the ghost. That would come later. During the day, she painted like never before. The collaborations with Morpheus had unlocked something in her, broken down the walls she'd built around her own emotions. She created pieces that scared her with their honesty. A self-portrait with her rib cage open, showing a bird's nest inside. A woman transforming into smoke, half real and half dissolving. A pair of hands holding fireflies that spelled out words in bioluminescent light. I see you. At midnight, Morpheus would appear, and they'd work together in the third-floor studio. He'd paint while she organized, his brush moving with the frantic energy of someone racing against time. Which he was. Every night was a countdown. 60 minutes to create. 60 minutes to love. 60 minutes to pretend they had forever, when they barely had now. They kissed between brushstrokes, made love against canvases drying in moonlight, cold meeting warm in a collision that should have been impossible, but felt inevitable. Talked about what would happen if the exhibition worked, if it didn't, if he was freed, if he wasn't. What if I'm still trapped? Morpheus asked one night, his head on her shoulder, his too cold body pressed against her too warm one. What if the exhibition changes nothing? Then we try something else. Maya ran her fingers through his hair, marveling at how something so insubstantial could feel so real. And we keep trying until we find the answer. We have time, do we? His voice was small, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard. Maya, I'm terrified, not of staying trapped. I've been trapped for 147 years. I'm terrified of hoping, of believing this might work. Because if it doesn't, if nothing changes, I don't know how to go back to being alone. You won't be alone. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. But you're alive. Someday, you'll want more than a ghost who can only love you for 1 hour a day. You'll want someone who can walk with you in sunlight, who can give you a real life. And I'll have to watch you leave because I love you too much to trap you in this half-existence with me. She pulled back to look at him, this impossible man made of moonlight and longing. You don't get to decide what's enough for me. I choose you. 1 hour or 100. Midnight or morning. I choose you. The clock struck midnight. 30 minutes left. Morpheus kissed her like a man drowning, like she was air, and he'd been suffocating for over a century. They made love with the desperation of people who knew their time was borrowed, stolen, running out. When they finished, trembling and tangled together, he whispered against her neck, If this works, if I'm freed, I'm still dead. I'll still be whatever I am. There's no happy ending where I become human again. I know. Then why are you doing this? Because you deserve to be seen. She kissed his cold forehead. Because your art deserves to exist in the world. Because even if you're trapped here forever, You should know that people recognized your talent, that your work mattered, that you mattered. Because love isn't about happy endings. It's about showing up for each other, even when the outcome is uncertain. He held her until the clock struck 1, and even as he faded, she felt loved in a way she'd never felt before. The invitations went out 3 days before the exhibition. Maya had chosen carefully: art critics who appreciated the unconventional, gallery owners who specialized in outsider art, collectors who valued story as much as technique, and a handful of artists whose work explored themes of memory and loss. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Everyone accepted. Artists loved the mystery. Critics loved the novelty. Collectors loved the exclusivity. No one questioned why the exhibition was at midnight. It was art. Art was supposed to be strange. Maya spent the final days preparing the house. She hired cleaners to make the first 3 floors presentable while keeping the Gothic atmosphere intact. She borrowed portable lighting from a theater company, positioning it to highlight paintings without overwhelming the moonlight that made Morpheus's work glow. She printed programs describing the exhibition as a collaboration between a Victorian-era painter and a contemporary artist, leaving Morpheus's death date conspicuously absent. She catered wine and small bites, hired a pianist to play in the foyer, created an experience that would make people remember this night forever. But she didn't tell Morpheus any of this. Didn't mention how many people were coming, how much attention his work was already generating from the preview images she'd shared. She was terrified that hope would be worse than not knowing. On the night of the exhibition, she dressed carefully. A black vintage dress that looked like it could have come from Morpheus's era. Her hair pinned up, her makeup minimal. She wanted to look like she belonged to the house, to the art, to the ghost she loved. At 11:45, the first guests arrived. By 11:55, the house was full. 40 people wandered through the first floor, viewing Morpheus's early work. Street scenes and portraits. Technical mastery that made even the jaded critics pause. Maya watched them, her heart hammered. At exactly midnight, she stood at the base of the grand staircase and cleared her throat. The pianist stopped playing. 40 faces turned toward her. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "What you've seen so far is only the beginning. The real exhibition is upstairs, in the 3rd-floor studio where these paintings were created. But first, I need to tell you the truth about the artist you're here to see." She took a breath. Morpheus Nightfall died 147 years ago. The room erupted. Excited whispers, confused questions, a few accusations of elaborate hoax. Maya raised her hand. "Please, let me finish. For 147 years, Morpheus has existed in this house, trapped between worlds, unable to share his art with anyone. Until now. Tonight, at midnight, he becomes real enough to touch. Real enough to meet you, real enough to finally have the exhibition he died trying to reach. I don't expect you to believe me, but I'm asking you to come upstairs, to see his work, and to decide for yourselves what's real." She turned and climbed the stairs, not looking back to see who followed. But she heard footsteps. 40 pairs of feet climbing behind her, curiosity stronger than skepticism. The 3rd-floor studio blazed with light. Maya had positioned it perfectly, illuminating Morpheus's 147 years of work in all its heartbreaking glory. The guests spread out, moving from painting to painting, and the whispers changed. "These are extraordinary." Look at the technique, the emotion. This couldn't have been painted by one person. There's too much evolution, Too many styles, unless someone said slowly, they really were painted over 147 years. Maya stood in the center of the room, watching the clock. 12:05, 12:07, 12:10. Morpheus, she whispered to the air. They're here. They see you. Please, show yourself. At first, nothing happened. Maya's heart sank. She'd been so certain, so sure that being seen would be enough, that recognition would break whatever kept him trapped. But the clock kept ticking, and the studio remained empty except for the living. Then a woman gasped. She was standing in front of one of Morpheus's self-portraits, painted decades ago. A young man with dark hair and silver eyes, holding a paintbrush like a weapon. I saw him, she whispered. Just for a second. In the reflection of the frame, he was standing right behind me. Another guest backed away from a landscape, pointing. The paint. It's still wet. But these are supposed to be over a century old. Maya's breath caught. She moved to the painting, touched the surface. Her finger came away with fresh oil paint, Prussian blue, still gleaming. Around the room, other guests were discovering the same thing. Wet paint. Moving shadows in the corners. The temperature dropping degree by degree until their breath misted in the air. He's here, Maya said. She didn't shout, didn't need to. The room had gone silent, everyone feeling it. The presence, the weight of something old and lonely and desperate to be acknowledged. Morpheus. She spoke to the air, to the shadows, to the cold that was seeping into her bones. These people came to see you, to see your work. You don't have to hide anymore. The lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied, but brighter than before, as if fed by something beyond electricity. And in the center of the room, Morpheus began to appear. Not all at once, not solid, but like someone slowly coming into focus, like a photograph developing in reverse. First an outline, then suggestion, then detail. His dark hair, his pale face, his silver eyes that looked more human than they'd ever been before. His Victorian clothes that no longer seemed costume but natural. Right. The room erupted in gasps and excited whispers, but Maya only had eyes for him. He looked different, more real, more here. His feet actually touched the floor, making soft sounds on the hardwood. His shadow fell across the paintings behind him, and when he breathed, she could see his chest rise and fall. Morpheus, she whispered. Are you? He looked down at his hands, turning them over in wonder. I'm solid. It's not midnight. I'm still solid. Maya crossed to him, her hand shaking as she reached out. Her fingers met his chest, and instead of cold, she felt cool. Not ice, not death, just the temperature of someone who'd been standing in shadow. His heart wasn't beating, but he was undeniably there. How? She asked. I don't understand. You're supposed to fade at one. A critic stepped forward, an older woman with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back. I think I understand. She gestured at the room full of people, all staring at Morpheus with various expressions of shock, wonder, and fascination. In all the old stories, ghosts remain because they're unseen, unacknowledged. The classic haunting is just a spirit desperate for recognition. But look around. 40 people see him, acknowledge him, validate that his existence mattered. Another voice, a younger man who taught art history at the university, the exhibition. He died on the way to his first showing, died before the world could see his work, validate his existence as an artist. This was his unfinished business. Not revenge, not a message, just the basic human need to be witnessed, to matter. Maya's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Morpheus, who was staring around the room like a man waking from a long dream. Is that true? Did they free you? He touched his face, his arms, testing the reality of his own existence. I'm here. It's past midnight, and I'm still here. I can feel the floor beneath my feet. I can hear the room breathing. I can see all of them seeing me. The guests surged forward, not frightened, but excited. Questions flew like birds. How long have you been painting? What was your process? What does it feel like to be trapped for 147 years? Can you teach us? Will you show us more? Morpheus looked overwhelmed, beautiful and terrified, and so achingly hopeful it hurt to see. He turned to Maya, his eyes asking a question he couldn't voice. She smiled through her tears. Talk to them. Tell them your story. Show them who you are. You wanted to be seen. Now let them see you. And he did, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. He told them about dying young, about waking up trapped, about painting through the decades, watching art evolve around him, creating in isolation because he couldn't not create, about Maya walking into his house and seeing him when everyone else looked through him, about hope, that dangerous thing he'd tried not to feel for 147 years. The guests listened like people hearing a fairy tale come to life. They asked about technique, about inspiration, about what it was like to watch the world change while remaining stuck in one moment. They treated him not as a curiosity, but as a fellow artist, as someone who mattered. At 2 a.m, Morpheus was still solid, still real, still there. At 3 a.m, he laughed at something a guest said, and the sound was warm, human, nothing like the hollow wind through rooms voice Maya had first heard. At 4 a.m, the guests reluctantly began to leave, but not before extracting promises. Gallery showings, museum exhibitions, interviews and documentaries. Morpheus Nightfall, the ghost artist, was about to become the most famous painter of the century. Maya stood in the doorway, watching them go, watching Morpheus shake hands and accept business cards, and looked dazed by all of it. When the last guest left, the house fell silent. Morpheus stood in the center of the empty studio, surrounded by his lifetime, his death time of work. Maya watched him from the doorway, suddenly uncertain. Everything had changed. He was free, or at least freer than he'd been. But what did that mean for them? Are you okay? She asked quietly. He turned to her, and his eyes were full of wonder and fear in equal measure. I don't know. I'm still here, still solid. It's nearly dawn and I haven't faded. I can feel time passing differently, like I'm tethered to the world in a way I wasn't before. He looked down at his hands again, flexing his fingers. But I'm still dead, Maya. I'm still whatever I am. I just get to exist more fully in it. Is that enough? She crossed to him, taking his hands. Her touch had always been warm against his cold, but now the temperature difference was less extreme. He was warming, or she was cooling, or maybe they were meeting somewhere in the middle. It's more than we had. More than you've had in 147 years. That's something. But what happens now? His voice cracked. They want exhibitions. Interviews. They want me to be part of the art world. How do I explain that I can't go outside? That I'm still trapped in this house? Are you? Maya gestured to the windows, where dawn was breaking in shades of pink and gold. You were solid all night. You talked to people, shook hands. What if the house was never the prison? What if invisibility was the prison? And now that you've been seen, really seen, the boundaries have changed. Morpheus stared at the window like it might explode. You think I can leave? I don't know. But there's only one way to find out. She pulled him toward the stairs, down through the house to the front door. The same door she'd walked through 6 weeks ago, desperate and alone. The same door he'd been trapped behind for 147 years. His hand trembled in hers as they reached it. What if I dissolve the moment I cross the threshold? What if being seen wasn't enough, and I'm still bound here? Then we'll figure something else out. Maya squeezed his hand. But Morpheus, you have to try. You've spent 147 years afraid of hope. Don't let fear trap you now. That hope might actually be real. He nodded, took a breath he didn't need, and reached for the door handle. It opened easily beneath his touch. Outside, dawn painted the world in gold and pink. The street was empty, quiet, except for birdsong. The threshold waited. That invisible line between inside and outside, between prison and freedom. Morpheus looked at Maya one more time. If I disappear, I want you to know you gave me more in 6 weeks than I had in 147 years. You made me feel alive. You made me matter. You're not going to disappear, she said firmly, even though her heart was hammering. You're going to step outside, and then we're going to figure out this new life together, one step at a time. He stepped through the doorway. Nothing happened. No dissolving, no fading, no return to shadow. Morpheus stood on the front steps of his house, in full sunlight for the first time in 147 years, and remained solid. The sun touched his face, and he gasped. "It's warm," he whispered. I'd forgotten what warm felt like. Tears streamed down his cheeks, and they were real, actual tears, not the phantom echoes ghosts couldn't cry. I can feel it. The sun, the air, the world. He took another step, then another, walking down the path he'd died on, moving through the iron gate he'd watched rust for over a century. The street that had changed 100 times while he remained frozen stretched before him, full of possibility. Maya followed, her own tears blurring the sunrise. They stood together on the sidewalk, ghost and artist, impossible and real, watching the world wake up around them. "I'm still dead," Morpheus said, but he was smiling. "I don't need to breathe. My heart doesn't beat. I don't know what I am anymore. You're free." Maya took his hand. "That's what you are. Free to create. Free to be seen. Free to exist in more than 1 hour. Isn't that enough?" He pulled her close, and his kiss tasted like sunlight and hope, and all the mornings they'd never thought they'd have. When they broke apart, he was still solid, still real, still there. "We should go back inside," he said. "Figure out what this means, what I can do, how this works. Or," Maya countered, "we could walk. Just for a little while, see how far you can go. Test the limits." His eyes widened. "I've been trapped for 147 years, and you want to go for a walk?" She grinned. "You've been trapped for 147 years. Don't you want to know if you still are?" They walked. Through streets Morpheus half recognized, past buildings that had replaced ones he remembered. The city had changed around him, and now he could finally explore it. They walked until he grew tired, which was new. Ghosts didn't get tired. But whatever he was now, some hybrid of spirit and substance, apparently needed rest. They returned to the house as the sun climbed higher, both exhausted and exhilarated. Inside, they collapsed on her mattress, tangled together in a way that would have been impossible weeks ago. "How long can you stay solid?" Maya asked. "I don't know." He ran his fingers through her hair, marveling at the texture. "I don't feel like I'm fading. Maybe being seen, really seen by all those people, changed the fundamental nature of what I am. Or maybe I'll fade at midnight and have to start over." We'll figure it out. She kissed his shoulder. Whatever you are, however this works, we'll figure it out together. They spent the next weeks testing his limits. Morpheus could stay solid indefinitely now, though he was stronger at night, more vibrant in moonlight. Sunlight didn't hurt him, but it made him tired in a way darkness never did. He still didn't need to eat or sleep, though he enjoyed both for the sensory experience. Coffee tasted like memory. Food was more about texture than flavor. Sleep was optional but pleasant, a way to pass time pressed against Maya's warmth. He could leave the house, walk the city, meet with gallery owners and critics. But he couldn't travel far. Not yet. There was still a tether, invisible but present, pulling him back to the manor. After about 5 miles, he'd start to fade, becoming translucent at the edges. So they made the house their base, their sanctuary, the place where he was most real. The art world exploded with interest. Morpheus Nightfall became a sensation, not despite being dead, but because of it. His story was too perfect, too impossible, too much like a fairy tale to ignore. Galleries begged for his work. Museums offered exhibitions. Documentaries wanted interviews. But they were careful. Maya and Morpheus decided together which pieces to share, which stories to tell. They kept some things private, the midnight hours before he was freed, the intimacy of those stolen moments, the way they'd fallen in love in the space between heartbeats. That was theirs alone. The first major exhibition opened 3 months after that midnight showing. It was a retrospective spanning 147 years, showing the evolution of Morpheus's style from Victorian realism to contemporary abstraction. Critics called it groundbreaking. Collectors paid 6 figures for pieces he'd painted in desperation and loneliness. And Morpheus stood in the gallery, solid and real, talking about his work with the confidence of someone who'd finally been seen. Maya displayed her own work alongside his, the collaborations they'd created together, ghost and artist, learning each other's languages, but also her solo pieces, the honest ones, the scary ones, the paintings she'd been too afraid to show until Morpheus taught her that being seen was worth the risk of rejection. The gallery owner who'd once rejected her work called personally to apologize. "Your new pieces are extraordinary," he said. "You found your voice." Maya looked at Morpheus across the gallery, watching him discuss composition with a younger artist who hung on his every word. "No," she said. "I found someone who helped me remember I had a voice all along." Life, or whatever they had now, settled into a new rhythm. Maya still painted during the day, but now Morpheus could work beside her, both of them creating in comfortable silence. At night they'd walk through the city, exploring places he'd only seen through windows for over a century. They'd return to the house and make love with the desperate intensity of people who still couldn't quite believe their luck, but they were also realistic. Morpheus was dead, even if he was the most interactive dead person Maya had ever met. He would never truly age, never change beyond what he was. And Maya would. She was 22 now, but eventually she'd be 30, 40, 60. She'd get old while he remained frozen at the age he died, 28. "Does it bother you?" she asked one night, lying tangled in their bed. "That I'll get old and you won't?" He traced the line of her collarbone, his touch warm now instead of cold. "Ask me when you're 80, and I'm still 28. Maybe then I'll have an answer. But now, I'm just grateful for every day I get to touch you. Every day I get to create beside you. Every day I'm not alone. I can handle the rest." They got married in the manor's garden exactly 1 year after she'd signed that $1 lease. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and a few fellow artists. The officiant didn't ask too many questions about the groom's lack of legal documentation. Artists married strange things all the time. Love was love, even when one party was technically deceased. Maya wore vintage lace that looked like it had come from Morpheus's era. He wore the same Victorian clothes he'd died in, restored and cleaned, a ghost dressed for his own wedding. They exchanged rings made by a jeweler who specialized in custom work and didn't ask why the groom's finger was unusually cold. When the officiant pronounced them married, Morpheus kissed his bride in full sunlight and remained solid. The guests cheered. Maya cried, and somewhere in the universe, the rules bent a little further to accommodate this impossible love. 5 years later, Maya stood in the same third-floor studio where they'd held that first midnight exhibition. But everything was different. The space had been transformed into a shared workspace. 2 easels side by side, their paintings covering every wall. Some were hers, bold and emotional and unafraid. Some were his, technically perfect and soaked in memory. Most were collaborations, their styles so intertwined now that sometimes even they couldn't remember who'd painted which section. She was 27. He was still 28, frozen in the moment of his death 152 years ago. But the age difference barely registered. She'd learned that love wasn't about matching timelines. It was about matching souls. Morpheus materialized behind her, his arms sliding around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. He was always more solid at dusk, the transition between day and night strengthening whatever tether kept him real. "Working on the gallery piece?" he asked. She nodded. Their next exhibition was in 2 weeks, a show exploring the nature of permanence and change. Fitting, given their relationship. "How was your lecture?" "Exhausting." Morpheus now taught art history at the local college, the dead professor who could speak about the Victorian era with personal authority. The students loved him. The administration had stopped asking questions after his classes consistently received the highest enrollment. He made them promise not to paint him differently in their memories than he was in reality. "And what reality is that?" Maya teased. "A ghost who teaches art history, married to a woman who paints his portrait in sunlight even though he's technically dead?" "Exactly." He kissed her neck. "Promise me that when we're old, well, when you're old and I'm still this, you'll paint the truth. The age difference, the strangeness, all of it. I promise." She turned in his arms. "But you have to promise me something too. Anything. Don't fade." She knew it was irrational. He'd been solid for 5 years, growing stronger, if anything. But sometimes late at night, she still woke up afraid she'd reach for him and find only air. "Don't ever go back to being invisible." "I won't." His eyes were serious. "Maya, I think being seen by you, being loved by you, changed something fundamental. I'm more real now than I ever was when I was alive. Because you see me. Not the ghost, not the dead artist. Just me." They kissed in the fading light, artist and ghost, wife and husband. 2 impossible people who'd built an impossible life. Outside, the city hummed with evening traffic. The manor creaked and settled around them, witness to 152 years of loneliness and 5 years of love. In the distance, a clock chimed. Not the countdown to midnight, not anymore. Just the passage of time, which they'd learned to stop fighting. That night, they worked side by side until late, painting their way toward the next exhibition, the next moment, the next breath. Maya would age. Morpheus would not. She would eventually die. He was already dead, but for now, in this studio full of color and light and accumulated years of art, they had each other. And that was enough. When they finally went to bed, exhausted and paint-stained, Morpheus held her the way he always did. Close enough to feel her heartbeat, the rhythm that reminded him what being alive had felt like. Close enough that her warmth seeped into his perpetual cool, meeting somewhere in the middle. "I love you," Maya whispered, already half asleep. "I love you," he replied. "And I'll love you when you're 80, And I'm still 28. I'll love you when your hands shake too much to paint. I'll love you when you forget my name. I'll love you until you join me on this side of death, and then I'll love you in whatever comes after. Promise? Promise. She fell asleep in his arms, and he stayed solid through the night, through the dawn, through all the hours that used to be forbidden. The manor settled around them, no longer a prison, but a home. The paintings on the walls told their story, artist and ghost, learning to see each other, learning to be seen. And in the morning, when sunlight streamed through the studio windows, Morpheus would still be there, solid and real and permanently tethered to the woman who'd rented a room for $1 and stayed for love.